the other passenger in the taxi. I was in Mexico City not too long ago. If you've never been, it's this massive, sprawling place. Louder, busier, and more alive than almost anywhere else I've seen. During the day, the streets are a mess of honking horns, street vendors yelling over one another, buses packed so tight you can't even squeeze in. At night, though, things change. Some neighborhoods are still buzzing, especially around the clubs. But once you drift out into the darker streets, it gets quiet fast. Too quiet, considering how many people live there. That night, it was late, probably close to 2 in the morning, and I was exhausted. I'd been out drinking mezcal with a friend. If you don't know, it's kind of like tequila, but smokier and stronger. And instead of staying the night at his place, I decided to grab a taxi back to the tiny Airbnb I'd rented. In Mexico City, especially late at night, it's pretty common to wave down a street cab, though locals will warn you that it's safer to call through an app or radio dispatch. I was too tired to think about it. I saw a green and white cab coming down the road, flicked my hand out, and it pulled over. The driver leaned across the seat to unlock the door. I slid into the back, shut it, and muttered the name of the street I was staying on. That's when he turned his head slightly and asked, in Spanish, "Hasta dónde van los dos?" Which means, "Where are you two going?" For a second, I didn't register it. My brain was still fogged with mezcal, still sorting through the words. Then it hit me. Dues. 2. I glanced to my right. There was someone sitting next to me. At least I thought there was. The back seat was dim, the only light coming from the street lamps flickering past. I swear, I could see the shape of a shoulder, the outline of a head turned slightly forward. But the face, if there was a face, was sunk into the kind of darkness you don't get from shadows alone. The person didn't move, didn't breathe in that obvious chest-rising way. They just sat there. I laughed nervously, like maybe the driver was making some kind of joke. I said, "It's just me, amigo." He didn't laugh. He looked in the rearview mirror, eyes darting, then flicked them back at the road so fast, it was like he didn't want to keep looking at me. Or at us. "Esta tarde," he muttered. "It's late." I pressed my hand down on the door handle, thinking, screw this. I'm getting out. But before I could push, before I could even swing the door open, the driver's voice dropped to this whisper, shaky and urgent. "Demasiado tarde. Ya se dio cuenta." Too late. It's already noticed. I froze. Not because of what he said, but because when I heard those words, I felt the air beside me change. Like the pressure in the cab shifted, the way it does when someone leans in too close. Cold. Heavy. My skin prickled all over, and I realized I'd been holding my breath without even noticing. The driver suddenly pressed harder on the gas, and the cab jolted forward. He was gripping the wheel like his life depended on it. I wanted to yell, to demand what the hell he was talking about, but the words got stuck in my throat. All I could do was stare straight ahead, because turning to look at the thing beside me felt impossible. Minutes passed, the city outside blurred, streetlights smearing into streaks. The driver wouldn't look at me, wouldn't even look in the mirror anymore. Just drove, knuckles white. And that presence, whatever it was, didn't leave. It stayed pressed right against my side, like someone riding along quietly, waiting. I don't know how long it went on. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20. Finally, the cab screeched to a stop in front of a brightly lit convenience store. The driver turned halfway, his face pale, and barked at me, "Get out, right now." I didn't argue. I shoved the door open, stumbled onto the curb, and the cab peeled off before I'd even shut it. The second my feet hit the concrete, that heavy, suffocating pressure lifted. It was like the air snapped back into place. Normal again. I stood there under the buzzing, fluorescent lights of the shop, heart hammering, sweat soaking through my shirt. When I finally turned to look at the road, The cab was already gone, swallowed up by the city. I walked the rest of the way to my ABBBI. Every step I took, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting someone, or something, to still be following me. But the street stayed empty. Just the hum of a stray car in the distance and the barking of a dog behind a gate. To this day, I don't know what the driver saw, or what I almost saw. But one thing sticks with me. The way he said, "Too late, it's already noticed," like there was some kind of rule, some line I'd crossed without realizing. And the worst part? I don't even remember seeing that back door open when I first got in. The fingers under the door. I was driving through northern Mexico once, heading down one of those long highways that feel like they'll never end. If you've ever been out there, Nuevo León specifically, you know the kind of road I mean. It's just endless stretches of desert, a few scraggly bushes, maybe a lonely gas station every hour or so. Trucks roar by constantly, carrying goods back and forth between the US border and the rest of Mexico. It's a place that makes you feel very small, like the world has suddenly gone too wide. It was late when I decided to stop. I'd been driving all day, and my eyes were starting to burn. Out there, along those highways, you get these roadside motels. Cheap, no-frills places where truckers, salesmen, and exhausted travelers crash for the night. If you're American, think of it like a mom-and-pop motor inn, but way rougher around the edges. Neon sign half burned out, paint peeling, a dusty parking lot with a couple of rigs idling outside. That's where I pulled in. I checked in with the guy at the front desk. He barely looked up, just slid me a key attached to one of those heavy plastic tags. No ID check, no fuss. He pointed me to a room halfway down the row. It was one of those setups where all the doors face the lot, no hallways. Just a single row of rooms, with chipped doors and dim bulbs buzzing overhead. The room itself was exactly what you'd expect. Thin carpet, a sagging mattress, a rattling AC unit in the wall. I tossed my bag on the chair, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the bed. The sheets smelled like detergent barely covering up something older. But I didn't care. I just needed a few hours of sleep before driving again in the morning. That's when I heard it. At first, it was just a light scrape, like someone dragging their fingernails across wood. I thought maybe it was a branch or some loose piece of metal outside, shifting in the wind. But then I looked at the door. You know how cheap motel doors always have that little gap at the bottom? Just enough that light from the outside seeps in? Well, through that gap, something started moving. Fingers, at least half a dozen of them, pale and twitching, slid under the door one by one. They weren't reaching in quick, like someone trying to grab something. They were slow, careful, almost curious. They crept across the linoleum floor, dragging along the dust, stretching toward the bed. I froze. My first stupid thought was that it was some kid messing around, trying to scare me. But these fingers didn't look like a kid's. They were too long, too bony, and there were too many. The door rattled suddenly, the knob jerking hard like someone was trying to push in. Instinct kicked in, and I bolted upright, slammed my palm against the knob to hold it down. It twisted under my hand violently, back and forth, harder and harder, like whoever, or whatever, was out there wanted and bad. The fingers kept crawling further under the door, some bent in impossible angles, scraping the floor. I pressed my shoulder against the door, holding it shut, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached for my phone on the nightstand with my free hand. My plan was to call the police. Yeah, I didn't even know what I'd tell them, but it felt like the only option. My hand wrapped around the phone, screen lighting up, thumb hovering over the dial pad, and just like that, everything stopped. The knob went still. The rattling ended. I looked down at the floor. The fingers were gone. Not pulled back slowly. Just gone, like they'd never been there. The gap under the door was empty again, just a strip of light from the parking lot bulb outside. The silence was crushing. No footsteps, no voices, no trucks in the distance. Even the buzzing of the light outside had cut out. It felt like the whole world had paused. I stayed pressed against that door for what felt like forever, phone still clutched in my hand. Finally, when I couldn't stand it anymore, I forced myself to peek out the curtain. The lot was empty. No one walking, no cars pulling out. Not even the guy at the front desk. Just stillness. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the chair by the bed, phone in my hand, eyes locked on that door until dawn finally came and the truck started rolling by again. When I checked out in the morning, the man at the front desk didn't ask me how I slept. He didn't ask anything at all. Just took the key back without looking up. Driving away, I kept thinking about those fingers. They weren't desperate. They weren't frantic. They were patient. Testing. Like something was on the other side of that door, waiting to see how I'd react. And honestly, the scariest part isn't that I saw them. It's that for a few seconds, with my hand on that knob, I swear I could feel something pressing back. The last train in the dark. If you've never been to Mexico City, CDMX as people call it, it's hard to describe just how massive the place is. 20 million people, endless traffic, taco stands on every corner, and beneath all of it, this huge subway system that keeps the city moving. It's like the veins under the skin of the city. The metro is crowded, noisy, and sweaty during the day, but at night, especially close to the last train, it takes on a whole different feeling. The platforms get quiet. The tunnels feel longer. You realize just how far underground you are. That night, I was riding close to midnight, trying to get back across town. I'd been out near the Zocalo, the big historic square in the center, and I cut it too close with time. When I got down to the station, the air was damp and smelled faintly of dust and old electricity, if that makes sense. There weren't many people left waiting. A few students with backpacks, a man in a work uniform, and me. The train came roaring in, brakes screeching, doors opening with a metallic groan. We all shuffled in, spread out across the nearly empty car. Usually even the last train has vendors or musicians hopping on, selling gum or playing songs. But this one was silent. Just the hum of the lights and the echo of the tunnel. We'd barely been moving a few minutes when it happened. The lights flickered once, twice, then cut out completely. The train jerked to a stop somewhere between stations. Suddenly, everything was swallowed by pitch blackness. If you've never been underground when the lights go out, you can't imagine how absolute it is. No glow from the city, no emergency exit signs, just thick, suffocating dark. People started shifting in their seats nervously. Nobody screamed, but you could hear breathing, shuffling, someone muttering under their breath in Spanish. After a few seconds, a couple of us pulled out our phones, tapping on the flashlights. Thin beams cut through the dark, bouncing off the scratched metal walls, catching tired faces. That's when I noticed it. There were more people than before. When the train left the station, I'd counted maybe 5 or 6 of us. Now, under the dim glow of a phone light, I saw rows of seats that hadn't been filled suddenly occupied. Not full, but enough that it didn't make sense. They weren't moving much, just sitting there, shapes in the gloom, too still. Nobody said a word. Everyone with a light slowly lowered it, like we'd all had the same thought at once. Don't shine it on them for too long. The second the light in my hand went out, the silence changed. You know how in the dark you can feel when someone steps closer, even if they don't make a sound? That's what it was like. The air seemed heavier. A presence moved, not rushing, but inching forward, closer and closer. Someone's breath caught in their throat. Another person whispered a prayer. I sat frozen, phone in my hand, thumb hovering over the light button. Every instinct screamed at me to turn it back on, to prove to myself nothing was there. But I couldn't, because the longer we sat, the more certain I was that if I lit up the car again, I'd see those seats even fuller. Minutes dragged on like hours. The only sounds were our own breathing, and then something colder. A chill brushed the back of my neck, soft but deliberate, like the faintest exhale of breath that didn't belong to anyone near me. My skin prickled, and I clenched my jaw to keep from making a sound. We sat in that standoff with the dark until, without warning, the lights of the train snapped back on. The car was nearly empty again. Just us, the same handful I remembered from the platform. The seats that had been filled were bare. The silence was broken by the metallic groan of the train starting back up, rolling forward as if nothing had happened. Nobody spoke. Nobody even looked at each other. We all just sat there stiff, eyes glued to the floor, waiting for the next station. When the doors finally opened, everyone hurried off without a word. No eye contact, no muttered goodnight. Just scattered into the tunnels like we'd all made a silent agreement never to talk about what we saw, or thought we saw. To this day, whenever I ride a subway at night, I can't help glancing at the empty seats, counting the people around me, and wondering what might show up if the lights ever went out again. Because in that darkness, something was sitting with us, and I'll never forget the feeling of its breath, cold and deliberate, brushing against my skin like it was waiting for me to notice. The extra shadow in OAXACA. If you've ever been to Oaxaca, you know it's not like Mexico City. It's smaller, calmer, more colorful. The streets are lined with colonial buildings painted in bright reds, yellows, blues. And during the day, it feels alive. Markets bursting with vendors selling everything from mole paste to hand-woven textiles. But at night, once the sun drops and the shops close, the whole place changes. The streets get quiet, the stalls shutter down with those rattling metal gates, and the cheerful colors fade into dark outlines. That's the setting for this story. A friend of mine was staying in Oaxaca for a while, and one night, instead of taking the main roads back to his hostel, he decided to cut through one of the big local markets. Now, in the US, when you hear market, you might think of a farmer's market, some tents in a parking lot with a few stands. In Mexico, it's different. These are massive indoor complexes, sometimes spanning whole blocks, narrow aisles, hundreds of stalls packed side by side, each one selling something different. Fruit, tortillas, meat, clothes, even phone chargers. During the day, it's chaos, voices, smells, people brushing past you constantly. But after dark, they shut it all down. Metal shutters rolled down, lights turned off. Empty. At least it's supposed to be. He said it was around 10 p.m. The whole place was dead quiet, just the echo of his footsteps bouncing between the walls. Most of the stalls were locked tight, the kind where you can see padlocks through the gaps, but halfway through the market, he saw something strange. One stall still had a light on. Not bright, just a weak yellow glow, slipping through the cracks of the shutters. He slowed down, confused. Maybe someone had forgotten to close up. But then, as he passed, he swore he saw movement inside. A shadow shifted against the light. Then came the worst part. The shutter rolled up just a little, just enough for him to see inside. And there, behind a wooden counter stacked with things he couldn't quite make out, stood a figure. A person. They lifted a hand slowly and started to beckon him in. Not waving, beckoning. A steady, deliberate curl of the fingers like, "Come closer." His chest went tight. Every instinct told him to keep walking. So he did. Eyes forward. Pace quickening, trying not to let his footsteps sound panicked. That's when he heard the voice. A woman's voice, low and firm, right behind him. No te vuelvas. Don't turn around! He almost stumbled. He hadn't seen anyone else in the market. No footsteps behind him, no sign of another person. But the voice was clear, as if someone was only inches from his ear. He didn't dare look back. Instead, he broke into a run. His sneakers slapped against the concrete floor as he bolted down the aisle. Stalls whipped past in his peripheral vision. Dark, shuttered, silent. His heart hammered so hard, it felt like it would crack his ribs. The exit wasn't far. He could see the faint square of moonlight, where the doors opened out to the street. He pushed himself harder, breath tearing in his throat. And then, just as he reached the last stretch, something made him glance down. That's when he saw it. On the ground, stretched out long in the dim light, was his shadow. But there were two. One of them matched his movements perfectly, every arm swing in stride. The other lagged just slightly, half a step behind, like it was chasing him. He said it wasn't faint or distorted either. It was sharp, clear, too clear. He didn't stop to think. He just ran faster, throwing himself through the market's exit and into the open air. The moment his shoes hit the street outside, the second shadow was gone. Just the normal glow of the street lamps, one shadow stretching at his feet. He didn't look back at the market, didn't stop running until he reached his hostel, chest heaving, legs trembling so bad he could barely climb the stairs. Later, when he tried to tell someone about it, they brushed it off, said he was tired, maybe he imagined it, but he swore the voice was real, swore the shadow was real. And honestly, the way he told it, I believed him, because the scariest part wasn't the stall with the light, or even the beckoning hand. It was the voice that told him not to turn around. Like whoever, or whatever, was in that market knew exactly what would happen if he did. And he still wonders whose shadow was following him out that night. The knocks on the windows in Chiapas. Chiapas is one of those places in Mexico that feels almost untouched. It's mountains and jungle, villages tucked into the hills, and roads that twist forever through fog and pine trees. It's beautiful, but at night, it can feel isolated, like the world has pulled away and left you completely alone. I stayed once in a family-run guest house there, in a small mountain village that barely even showed up on Google Maps. When I say guest house, don't think of a polished hotel. This was just a big wooden home where the family rented out 2 extra rooms. The floors creaked, the walls were thin, and the air smelled of wood smoke from the kitchen stove. It was the kind of place where roosters woke you at dawn, and you could hear every dog barking in the distance. That night I couldn't sleep. The silence in those mountains is heavy. No cars, no city hum, just the occasional rustle of wind through trees. I lay on the bed under a heavy blanket, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling, when I heard it. A knock. Soft, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the window right beside the bed. At first, I thought maybe it was a branch, but the sound was too precise. I hesitated, then pulled the curtain back just an inch. That's when I saw the face. Pale. Too pale. It wasn't like the dim glow of moonlight washing over normal skin. This face looked painted white, almost glowing against the night. The features were human, but wrong somehow. Expressionless. Eyes too wide. Lips pressed thin. It was just standing there outside, motionless, staring in. I yanked the curtain shut so fast, the rod rattled. My chest felt tight, and I pressed back against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. But before I could even think of what to do, the knocking started again, Not just at that one window. Every window. All at once. The sound echoed through the little house. Tap, tap, tap. Over the kitchen, the hallway, the other guest room. Like dozens of hands rapping on glass at the exact same rhythm. My heart was hammering so hard, I could barely hear myself whisper. I grabbed my phone, thought about calling someone, but who? I didn't even have reception up there. Instead, I bolted down the hallway toward the host's room. I knocked frantically on their door. After a moment, it opened, and the owner, a man maybe in his 50s, peered out, looking half awake, but immediately serious when he saw my face. "There's someone outside," I whispered, voice shaking. "They're knocking on all the windows." His eyes narrowed, but he didn't look surprised. He sighed, like he'd been expecting this. "That's why I told you," he muttered. "Don't go near the windows." Then he stopped. His words cut off mid-sentence. His expression froze. And then slowly, his gaze shifted past me, over my shoulder, into the darkness of the hallway I'd just come from. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me not to. My knees felt weak, and my throat tightened. But the silence stretched, and I could feel that heavy awareness behind me, like the air itself was leaning close. I don't know what he saw over my shoulder. He never said. Because in that moment, the knocks stopped all at once. The house fell dead silent, like nothing had ever happened. No taps, no footsteps, nothing outside. Just the two of us standing there frozen. The host finally exhaled. A sharp, shaky breath. He reached for something, a small cross hanging by his doorframe, and held it tight, muttering a prayer under his breath. He didn't invite me into his room, didn't explain, didn't comfort me, just told me to go back to bed, and above all, keep the curtains closed. Don't answer if it comes again. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the bed, blanket pulled up to my chin, staring at the window and listening for the faintest sound. Nothing else happened. But when morning came, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. Outside the windows, in the dirt just below the sills, were dozens of marks. Not footprints exactly, just smudges. Like the ground had been pressed down by hands. Too many hands. And every single one faced inward, toward the house. To this day, I don't know what was out there in those mountains, but I'll never forget the look on the host's face when his eyes shifted past me, like he knew exactly what it was, and like he knew it was already inside.